Hi, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. If you've come here via YouTube and want to know a little bit more about what we do, just head on over to officehours.global. That's kind of our primary web portal for more information and links about the show. Note, you can also use the QR code, which is over on this side down here somewhere. There it is. And you'll notice at the top it says askofficehours.global. You can actually type that into a web browser of any kind, and it'll get you to the same place. That lets you ask questions 24/7, 365. You can put them in the queue there, and then we will move them into the show queue. And for those of you who have been around a long time, you're probably in our Mukana system, which allows not only the additional space to put questions in, but also let you vote on those questions and decide kind of the run of show based on your votes. So that's how the system works. Today in our second hour, we'll begin talking about camera sensors. We often talk about lenses, but the sensors themselves do have a huge impact on the quality of images and other things, depth of field. We'll talk about all of that, how sensors work, why they're different, and what differences you should pay attention to if you're thinking about a camera that has some unusual type of sensor or something like that. That's our second hour. Mitch, what's our first question for our first hour today?
Thank you, Bill. Our first question comes to us from Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. What's the ideal way to send a mix-minus feed out of an ATEM Extreme ISO back to a Zoom participant? Should I use a super source and send that out on one of the HDMI outputs?
Well, it's a good question. And Mitchell Hill's going to start us, and then Chris Fenwick's going to take over from there. Mitchell?
This is destined to be the most controversial answer of all time. But I've got a quick, dirty way, and it's exactly what it is, and then probably a better way. And then Chris will be here. Well, anyhow, it's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a quick way to do it. If you go into your Fairlight audio settings in the ATEM, you can click those little headphone jacks at the bottom that are, I guess, supposed to be solos and create a mix minus. You can't adjust the volume easily, but you could indeed create a mix minus there if you chose to do that. But you would tie up that portion of your ATEM. The other way to do it, I suspect, is using Dante. Dante could create a router matrix that would allow you to create that and then send it back into your computer to go out to Zoom. And now the other answer.
Just so happens Chris Fenwick is very passionate about this, and we're going to hear from him now. Chris, take it away.
Alexander, don't listen to anything Mitch just said. That's all craziness. Here's the thing. By definition, mix minus means that you have to be able to mix it, and you have to be able to mix it separate from your program mix. So you can't do what you want to do. Also, it's important to remember that every output of an ATEM has the same program mix on it. So you can't, the super source idea, although clever, it doesn't work that way. So I think that technically the ideal way to do it is you can't do it. So you're probably going to have to do something else. I would do something with my setup, which is a whole nother nightmare. I think, Alexander, if I'm correct, you're more PC-centric, so there's probably some sort of potato product to help you do it, but you're going to be doing something inside the box, but you can't do a mix-minus on an A10.
It does become a complex thing. And for those of you who might not understand this audio terminology, a mix-minus is used constantly in broadcasts and other places where essentially I'm speaking into a microphone, it's going into a program, other people are being mixed into it. When I get a feedback to myself so I can hear myself, I do not want any delay in that. So if my voice is going out into the main mix and that version of my voice is coming back to me and I'm also monitoring on my headphones directly from my microphone, you get a terrible situation where yourself is delayed and you can't hear things. So it is important to remove the microphone from the send back to me. So each individual participant, everybody here in the grid, is getting sent back to them the show minus themselves so that they can have a clean audio feed and participate in the show without this delay problem. So that is a piece of what is going on here. Let's go to Alex. Alex.
I think the only question is how many people too, because if you're talking about just a person, it's a little simpler, and Mitch's solution could work for that. But you can't do it for more than one because it's your program out. So I think that you'd have to. It would be a pretty simple, because I think that a lot of what Alex does specifically is usually one-on-one, one person local or one person remote. And remember that if your entire program is mix minus to zoom automatically, I mean, if you're not, if you know, it just depends on how you route that back. So and in general, I don't use the audio in the A10. so in general, it's really, really think about whether that makes sense for you or not. It is. I think that they could make it usable. I just don't think that they have. So.
Courtney, you want to chime in?
Yeah, if you're on Windows, Windows 11 added this cute little volume mixer and router. It's kind of like not quite as capable as Hijack, but you have control over your, what your system is using for inputs and output devices, and you can choose amongst the various inputs and outputs there, and you can control what apps are feeding in and where they're feeding. So if you click on Zoom meetings, you can set what you want for your inputs and what you want for your outputs. You can choose individually. On each Zoom stage, the stage is separate from the meeting. So you might be able to go in there and set up a patch and then take down that level, mix minus, for that particular item in your system. So that may be a way to do it. I'm not sure if it's going to work for your particular situation, but a lot of people forget that stupid little mixer that's built into Windows has been updated and is quite more capable now.
Alex, you want to come back in?
And on the Mac, I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but SoundDesk and Loopback and Audio Hijack are, and you only need Loopback and Audio Hijack or SoundDesk, right, Chris? You don't need Loopback theoretically if you're using SoundDesk. It has the routing in it.
Well, if you look at the software interface, you'll see my hand is up, and I'm going to talk after you're done.
Well, then go.
Chris.
I have, because Alex threatened to do a lab on this months ago, I have indeed prepared a quick little thing. And if you just want to rewind this and play these slides back one at a time, you can probably figure it all out. But we could do it. Since Alex obviously is afraid of whatever.
I'm afraid of Chris's knowledge.
Whatever. If somebody's really interested, if a few people are really interested in this, we could do a lab, contact the system. I don't know how all this back-end stuff works. And we'll pick a day and we'll do it like at 2 PM or whatever. And I'll go through it. I'll spend as much time as people want. But it's super powerful. And
are you using Loopback with SoundDesk or just SoundDesk?
No, Loopback and SoundDesk, and it's really critical. And the reason, I'll give you the quickest. These two slides are important. What you think you want to do is plug all your apps into SoundDesk, which really makes sense. Yes, I want a fader for Final Cut, and I want a fader for my browser, and I want a fader for QuickTime, and I want a fader for that's what you want to do. But you can't do that. The reason you can't do that is the window on the right-hand side. You only get to choose a input to SoundDesk, and you only get to choose a output for SoundDesk. But I need multiple inputs and multiple outputs. So what you have to do is you have to create an aggregate audio device using Loopback, and I have to put all of those things on the left-hand side. All of those apps are patched into my inputs that for a virtual thing called SoundDesk input. So this patch bay is what gets my audio into the mixer, and then this patch bay on the right-hand side is what gets my audio out of the mixer. So you really do kind of need to have Loopback to create those aggregate devices.
Well described and well explained. So hopefully, Alexander, this helps you. If you're on PC, you may not have access to those, but you can at least get the signal flow idea. And hopefully there will be tools in your software to enable you to do exactly the same thing. Thanks for the question. Let's move on to the next one.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. Considering an M2 Mac Studio for Zoom ISO support, how many 1080p NDI feeds are safe to expect with an M2 Mac?
Alex.
I would say 8. So I think there are some stats on the Liminal site on the actual load, and the M2 Max. There's some overhead with NDI that's a little higher than SDI, and so you are going to pay a little bit more of a price on the NDI. I do think you might be able to get up to 16 outputs, but I wouldn't do that. So I think that you want to look at probably 8 outputs should work fine out of an M2 Max. from one Mac Mini M2.
And I've been surprised lately that the laptops, the Mac Pros that have M2 Max chips have been relatively inexpensive lately. I would have thought that the Max, which is the step up from the main processor, would have kept things at a premium, but I'm seeing pretty substantial discounts on them now. I wonder if that means that the new models are coming out. Hard to say. You never know. Let's go to the next question.
Jack Ruppel from Breckenridge, Colorado has a question. I've got slides from the 70s taken with a film camera. Can I scan them with a Pro Max 15 laying on Elgato mini light and adjusting the color temperature for film type?
Chris Fenwick.
You could, Jack, but don't. I tried going down this path. I've found a bunch of my dad's old slides when I moved into my mom's house here. Don't do it. From a myriad of problems. What I will recommend is this little gizmo. It's a little Kodak slide projector. Look at Alex or somebody's going to say, "Oh no, what you need is a so-and-so drum scanner, blah blah blah." You know, end of the world. You know, archival
That's
print,
exactly
whatever.
what I was going to say is a drum scanner.
So forget that madness. That he's going to cost you $10,000. This thing is like $1.50. It's like maybe 80. Here, hold on. It's $180. Okay, and it works like a charm, and it does pretty good. You're talking about your old family slides from the 70s. You stick it's stupid simple. Just get this thing. And don't,
Alex.
whatever you do, don't listen to Alex. It'll cost you too much money.
Whoa, contentious panel today. Alex, take us away.
The Epson line of scanners is pretty good, and they range from about $99 to about $1,200. You just got to decide how much pain you're willing to take, as far as how much you pay for it. I have the $1,200 one. It's great. And you can scan slides. So it's 6,400 DPI. But for $100, you can get a 4,800 DPI. $100 Epson is, and this is a flatbed scanner, and not a drum scanner. Just as Chris was like, no one uses drum scanners anymore, just in case you're wondering. So anyway, not even people who want the highest quality. There's no, the flatbeds went way past that. But the 4,800 DPI optical resolution is really good. It's $99. And so take a look at those. They are, I would consider 4,800 DPI the minimum, just because you really, if you're going to do archive slides, you want to, or archive scans, you want to do this once, and so really think about what it takes to do that. If you're not willing to spend $99, send it out to a service or something. But I wouldn't go through the trouble of scanning stuff with phones and other things when you can just get a scanner for not very much money and it'll do a great job.
Courtney?
I would go even cheaper. The iPhone doesn't. I don't think it has a lens that was macro focusing close enough without an adapter putting on it to focus to get full frame on a 35 millimeter slide. What you might do is go to the local thrift store or eBay and pick you up a vintage carousel custom slide projector. Stick those slides in there, project it on a white card that's about 24 by 36, and then use your phone to shoot them. Set it up and shoot them, and you'll have them all in your phone. You'll have them in all of your phone app and be able to share them with everybody instantly after you do that show. Plus, you can add narration as you click through the slides. And here's the time we went to Yosemite.
There you go. Well, Jack, you have a variety of approaches here, but the good news is that it looks like there's ways to do it without spending a tremendous amount of money.
By the way, at about in the range of about $500 is where you get an incredible scanner. $500 or $600 is an incredible scanner that will, and the reason I'm studying this a lot, and I have one, but I'm also looking at getting another one for Pennsylvania. My plan is really to go out and scan all of my extended family's photos. And again, what I value is time. So I want to do this once. I want it to be really high quality, and I want to have an archive level photo, not one on my phone, not one I'm emailing people to, but if you have all these old photos from the 70s, it won't last forever. And getting them onto something and then putting them, and remember there's a 3-2-1, which is 3 locations, two places that aren't the same, physical locations, and 1 in the cloud. And if you do a 3-2-1 with your family photos and you scan them really well at the very beginning, everyone will be happy with you 100 years from now. and then the next step is printing them out. I'm slowly getting ready to print them all out too, so that there's I'll basically print 10 copies of each one of them, because it's just, there's photos that we should really, it's really worth talking about, because there's photos that my family has that are 100 years old, now, and they lasted on paper, and we're going to lose everything, from the digital world. And the ones that are just sitting around, around on the ground, or in your garage, are going to slowly get mold, and then you're going to really wish you had scanned them before that happened.
Chris, you want to do a quick pop in?
There's one last thing about what Alex was saying. We mentioned this last week. I call this the digital dark ages. And the thing that's even more upsetting is my family, they capture most of their memories in Snapchat. They're gone in 24 hours. Oh, did you see my snaps from the show? No. Can you show them? No, they're gone. Like the mindset that thinks that that's okay is mind-boggling.
I have to say, there's very few things that I enjoy more than my phone. On the iPhone, it's just when you open up the phone, every once in a while it just shows you, here's some photos from your past, and I've taken so many on my phone that I just get these amazing photos of my kids, of my wife, of from 10 years ago, of 8 years ago, of 15 years ago. It's not 15, not quite, but close. Yeah.
Do you ever watch those little memory reels?
Oh yeah, they're good. Apple.
They're really nice.
I have a great story to tell you about memories that I can't tell you on the air someday.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, so that's my cue to move us along to the next question.
Yeah, we have an incoming QR code question here, and you should enjoy it, from Matt L. in Oakland. When bringing a line into an A10 Mini Pro ISO from a soundboard, we get a 60-cycle hum. The line has been tested clean before plugging into ATEM. Try to line mic levels, DI box, and more. Thoughts, please.
Ground loop time. Mitchell, start us out.
And you just called it, Bill. That's exactly what's happening. It is that the ATEM is becoming a better ground than the ground that the soundboard has. I don't know what kind of soundboard you have. There are good ones and there are bad ones. The problem might be in the electrical isolation between the two. What I would try first would be an isolation transformer between it and a very short 3.5 connection, because that's what I'm assuming you're using. And that electrically isolates the two devices. As long as there's any kind of potential between the ATEM and the sound card, you're going to get some kind of a ground hum, because it's not a balanced line. Converting it to balance might help, but you need to have an electrical isolation. That's why I suggest a transformer.
Alex.
Or you can go the other way, not have electrical isolation. Go over to where the soundboard is, run a power cable to the outlet that the soundboard is plugged into, run it back to where you're at, and then plug your ATEM into that. What's happening is they're not sharing the same ground, so they don't have a common ground, and because of that, it's finding the ground through your system. And so what you need to do is they need to share the same ground. That doesn't mean they have to be on the same circuit, but those circuits have to share the same ground, and they're not. And so if they're not, it's gonna go through your audio cables, and that's what you're hearing there. And you hear this on like 30% of every press event that you ever see, is because they have a bunch of power and they have a bunch of things, and people are plugging everything in, and people are not very organized. So anyway, that's what you need to solve. There is another way to solve it that we've done. It depends on how long the event is, and what we're doing is we use batteries. So we'll use a battery with a 12-volt tap. So we've got these little batteries with 12 taps, and you can run that out of the battery and into your ATEM, and it'll go away as well, because there's no ground, because it's not. And I know people who use car batteries, and they run their entire system on it, so they don't want to ever think about hum, because they have to go from one bar to another to do these sound reinforcements, like just the records for bands, and they said it's just easier just to be all on battery. Like we just have, and it takes a little bit to push it up the hill, but then we're in, and we don't have to think about it. So anyway, but that's what's happening there.
Courtney?
Yeah, I'm with Alex. Get everything that's plugged into that ATEM, and I mean everything, plugged into a common outlet strip. I found this outlet strip online. It's really cool because it allows for 6. It has them on the side, and it also has several 5-volt USB power and USB-C power output on it. And it's handy to travel with. And that way you can plug everything, including all the wall warts, into the same power strip. It could be also a bad power supply since the ATEM runs off of DC that comes out of a wall wart. It could be, filter capacitors are failing in that thing, so it's letting a little AC leak in there. So you might try switching out the power supplies for your ATEM if that's a problem. And also work at line level input on the ATEM instead of mic level. You'll have less likely a chance of amplifying that AC hum coming in over the unbalanced inputs.
Jeffrey Powers.
You can also think about cleaning out that 3.5 port. I mean, that's a long shot, but there's always a chance that something in there is causing extra problem. But I was going to suggest what Courtney did: test your well wart, make sure that it's properly sending juice.
Fenwick.
Let's go to the ground loop problem. The ATEM itself isn't grounded. I mean, its power cable is just, positive and negative. So can you get a ground loop if something doesn't have a ground? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it can come in on any of the cameras, anything that's plugged into the HDMI inputs that is grounded somewhere else and has an AC power supply.
Mitchell Hill.
And Matt, just a final thought here. The problem seems to be pointing at the sound card or the computer it's plugged into. I would consider a different sound card just if all these other things don't work for you. It just might be a bad one or a poorly designed one that once you connect it to a different device, it's finding ground somewhere else. I recommend the Audio Science line. Just go to audioscience.com.
Okay, hopefully, Matt, that gives you lots of pathways to explore. Let's go to our next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania asked, does anyone know about the prescription lenses for Nreal Air glasses? Is it far vision or readers?
Alex.
They have I think 2 or 3 recommended ones. What he's talking about, it's actually used to be Nreal, now it's X-Real, I think, and these are the glasses that he's talking about. So these are, you'll see these. Let's see if I can get them up there. But there's actually a little screen in there, and there are some lenses that will pop out. There's no magnification on these. But then you can get a prescription, and they have a couple suggested suppliers of that. So you send your prescription, and they'll cut them out for you. So so anyway, so that's the you can get prescription ones. I'm using my contacts when I use them, just because it's easy. It's a lot cheaper than having someone make them. I don't know how much they are yet. I'm thinking about getting them. I don't. And so it could actually work. They're remarkably comfortable. There is a little bit of light. The monitors, there's some light that hits the side of the lenses just a little bit that you can see when you're watching a movie. It's very, very subtle, but you can't pick it up. But otherwise, it's a really fun thing to do. I think that I would. I'm going to be, next time I fly. I think next week I have to fly. I'll probably watch. It's very short flights. I'll probably just watch a TV show on it and see what it's like on a plane. But I think that they're actually a pretty good deal. We spend a lot of money on these VR goggles, and these are about, I think they're like $300 or something like that. So, or $350. It's good.
Remember, everyone, this show is driven by your questions. So if you have not put a question in and are curious about something, do so. The QR code is sitting right over there, and you can scan that with your phone or anything else, or type in what you see at the top of it, askofficehoursglobal.com. Anyway, that is how the show works. Oh, also remember to vote. If you are in Makana and looking through the questions there, your votes do count, because the things that have the highest votes we get to sooner and spend more time talking about. Let's go to our next question.
From Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado, I'd like to take an existing point-of-view video of a snowmobile causing an avalanche and composite that with a sight video of vegetation following a similar path on a long selfie pole with a grab grip. What are your thoughts?
Well, everybody's done that at some point, Alex.
Sounds actually pretty good. I think I understand what you're trying to do, is show vegetation that's built up or not built up in the aftermath of an avalanche. So later in the year or whatever, that this is what the avalanche created. I'm assuming that that's what you're trying to do. I think that it sounds like a really interesting thing. You should be able to do that. I think the thing to think about is stabilization, what kind of camera you're going to use to make that actually happen, to match that up. I think you may find that the thing that I would be tempted to do if you're really trying to match it frame for frame or get it really close is to use a drone. So what I would think about is match moving. I mean, this is a little bit more trouble than what you're talking about, but I actually think it'll end up being less trouble in the long term. Trying to match a POV exactly to the snowmobile data would be hard. But what you may be able to do is track all that data and figure out a way to get that motion spline back into a control point, for a drone, and then run the drone. And the drone will run potentially at the same speed and the same place. Now the lensing may be different, but you may be able to match it almost verbatim to that. You might have to smooth it out, do a Butterworth smooth on it. Butterworth is actually technically the calculation that you would do, but smooth out that thing so you get kind of this smooth move that goes right on it. And at first I didn't understand your question. Now I really want to do that. So send us the POV and we'll see if we can't figure it out. It seems like now I'm like, oh, that would be a lot of fun. I'll get Nick Justin in on it, and we'll think about how to reproduce it. Maybe even do some photogrammetry, throw it into Unreal Engine, add some monsters and a first person shooter, and you could be shooting Yetis while the avalanches are going. I mean, there's a lot of places this can go.
Courtney.
Yeah, but you do have to find a friend with a death wish to drive the snowmobile.
No, he's already got.
There's lots of video online.
He's already got the footage of the snowmobile.
Like snowmobiles causing avalanches taken from drones, and then you just have to find out what mountain it was taken on, and then go back there in the summer and position your drone in the same position that the drone was when the avalanche happened, and capture it with the vegetation.
We're office hours. There's no problem we can't overcomplicate.
Exactly. We can take your easy problem and make it super hard.
But it'll probably be fantastic to watch. Let's move on to the next question.
And now for something completely different. Bill Mew from Tunbridge Wells, UK, asked this question. There are several options for wireless mics, Rode, DJI, Hollyland, etc. Are there any with 4 transmitters for 4 at a time or 2 on charge with 2 in
4
use?
receivers, right?
I believe that would be transmitters.
He said 4 receivers, but I think he means transmitters.
Oh, transmitters down below.
He really means transmitters.
Receivers are simple, but transmitters hard. Anyway.
And finishing the question, that also does 32-bit float for quality. Any suggestions?
Yeah, and so we have a note here. I think he's talking about 4 transmitters. 4 transmitters into 1 receiver is always problems. 1 transmitter into 4 receivers is pretty easy because you just tune the receivers. And so we've done that multiple times on set. One that many people need to listen to, 1 transmitter, and you can tune the 4 receivers to them. But the other way is complicated. Courtney, start us off here.
Well, it used to be easy with analog transmitters and receivers for 1 transmitter, but there are systems out there designed for the hobbyist that have, here's one you can get from our friends in China with 4 transmitters and 1 receiver that's designed to plug into an iPhone. So it'll take these 4, and it has to go into something with a USB on it as an interface, because most of the lower price ones just come out as a stereo pair, so to keep these isolated, I guess it's got to go into something that has will take 4 inputs via USB. There's also the Ceramic one for a lot more expense. That's 4 transmitters, 1 receiver for $400. So you can find them. As far as 32-bit float and recording in there, the DJIs do, but they only do 2 at a time. You could buy 2 of the DJI sets and pair them, and when the receivers, the receiver is the first thing that's going to run out of battery, I think. Depends on whether or not you've got it plugged into USB input or you're taking the audio output out of it. So if you got it plugged into a USB, I think it can power itself. The transmitters will then run out first. But anyway, you could buy 2 of those, 2 transmitters, 1 receiver, and then swap them out after 2 hours. because they sync automatically when you put them in the charging case. So you could take the two off the people, put them in the charging case, and take your other two and swap the receiver out.
Alex, thoughts?
Didn't give a price. He didn't.
Watch out. Warning, everybody.
So he wanted 32-bit recording, multiple receivers, multiple transmitters. All I can say is sound device is Astral. So if you're gonna you didn't give us a price.
What would be the ante for that?
You got $12,000? No problem. Plug it into your iPhone.
So there are quite a few of these. Shure makes an entire line. Whether it's the there's a variety of Shure products that are designed for corporate that are going to give you those. The Astral line from Sound Devices is something you can put into a small pack. And it will get a lot of channels and let you manage those. And yeah, it's a little pricey. I'm not saying that it's not, but you have to, if you're going to ask, this is a lesson. And if you're going to ask us questions, you got to give us a price range of your target, or we're going to give you the answer. Like the answer is the Sound Device Astral line. So that's how you make this go away. If you've got, I think with the transceivers and receivers and and everything else, you're probably talking $14,000 to $18,000. But it'll work great. So. Anyway,
I think mining the metal off that new asteroid is about the only thing I've seen so far that there isn't a budget that can handle it. Everything else is possible. Let's go to the next question.
Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. Alex, have you tested your Saramonic interface with an iPhone, and do you have results to share with respect to the quality? What mics did you test with?
I have. I don't think I have it within arm's reach right now, but I have a Saramonic. It's a 2-channel Saramonic, and it's just a hard line. You put a 9-volt battery into it, so it can do 48-volt for the mics, and it goes into the Lightning. I have to find something new now because I've got a new phone. But although I haven't sent the other phone back, and it may just become my other camera. Again, it's very complicated. Anyway, so it's got 2 channels in. I've been using it. I tested it with the Countryman and the DPA, and they worked great. And that's what I was looking for. A little bit of self noise. I mean, it's not the most quiet thing in the world, but well within reason to cover something with your phone. So I'm not trying to get studio quality there. I think it's solid. I don't have any. You've got control over you can hear it back. You can, all the things that you need out of it. So I've been happy with it.
Yeah, I have 2 of those units, and I've used them occasionally in the field, and they've been very serviceable. No real serious problems. Again, I wouldn't try to do, super, super high. I wouldn't try to record a dialogue for an IMAX or something like that, but for regular stuff, it's perfectly fine.
What I will say is that if you are not going away from your phone, it's really nice to have everything wired together, wired to it. Like if it's a little thing that you're walking around and covering, definitely use wired instead of like some kind of Go or these little wireless ones. I watch people do this all the time. They are walking around with their phone, but they're going to use a wireless for whatever reason. And you see them take hits all the time because, these less expensive, 2.4 or 5.0 are picking up all kinds of stuff as they go through. So they're at an event and they're stepping on each other. They're getting stepped on by other things when they could have if they were going to do something with it, that makes sense. But most of the time, they're not going anywhere away from their phone. I'm like, just use a wire. It works. It's been working for the last 100 years.
Next question.
And it's another QR code drop question coming in from Todd Rains in Allen, Texas. Is there a wireless camera, think small, portable like Action Cam or Security Cam, that I can set up at a trade show booth for a weekend and watch it remotely? Or set it up as a time lapse and access the image file remotely?
We have a lot of questions today. This is cool. Let's dive through this really quick. Chris, start us off.
So, Todd, normally I wouldn't recommend something as inexpensive as this, but I will say that I have been using a brand of security cameras called Eufy, E-U-F-Y. You're not going to make a TV show out of this unless you're trying to, make a movie. Remember that old movie Paranormal, where it was all done off security cameras? Anyway, so Eufy has plenty of cameras. This one is $40, and it's a PTZ. It's not great quality, but you can absolutely follow the action. If you just want to keep track of your your trade show booth, make sure everybody's working for the weekend. You could stick a card in it. It'll record it. If you need to, you can, from your phone, you can go, hey guys, get back to work. You can talk to it, remotely, and you can scan through all the footage remotely. There are multiple apps that you can use to monitor it. I'm using this to monitor cameras all over the house here. And you said security camera, so I wanted to give you the absolute low end of the scale. I'm sure everybody else has something more expensive for you.
Courtney?
I have something even cheaper. The Wisecam OG is $17.99 right now, which is one that, there it is, right? I don't know, it's down there somewhere, $17.99. It does all that stuff. I think you can set it to time-lapse record. I'm not positive about that, but it does connect over Wi-Fi, and it does record locally onto a micro SD card. You can access it from the internet. It has a player you can access from anywhere. The most expensive proposition for this is paying for Wi-Fi connection or a wired connection at a trade show, which is going to cost you 100 times more than these cameras will.
Jeffrey Powers.
So yeah, I was also going to suggest the Wise, the first version Wise PTZ camera allows you to change the firmware to put in RTSP support. So you could actually send that to, I could actually send it to my computer and then send it to you guys if I wanted to. So if you go that route, there's several different PTZ versions of security cameras from Wise and Solium and let's see, EasyViz, and all these will allow you to do security camera. If you're doing it something that's you want to put out on like a YouTube or something like that, with time lapse, that's going to be a little tougher because lots of those are going to not be clean feed of videos. So the other thing is OBSBot did come out with a tail error, and it does have SD card input. It also has micro HDMI. It also has the ability to go wireless. But I would highly suggest that what you would do with that camera is bring it down to a little computer, set up the USB to Ethernet plug, and then of course have it. It'll run the power. It'll run the Ethernet. It doesn't do PoE, unfortunately, in that excuse me, in that such situation. But at least you'll have a solid connection going, and then bring it to the computer, and then the computer could be hardwired to, or if you can hardwire it to the conference show, because once you go wireless, as Courtney said, everything is going to go spotty. You might not even be able to get in to check your feed.
Alex.
Yeah, it depends on what your cell phone or your cell coverage is like, but what we've done at events in the past is use a Nest with a MiFi. We power it with like an Anton Bauer V-mount battery, like a pretty big battery there, and we can attach them all to the end of the pole if we want to, or have a little bit of power a little further down. But we can attach them all, and we've had them run all day. At the end of the day, we swap the battery and turn them back on if we want to. And the Nest will record everything that you want there. You can download those videos, and I don't really like taking time lapses. I take video and then I turn them into time lapses. And the reason for that is that typically in After Effects, there's a time echo filter that's hidden in there that almost nobody ever uses ever, but it makes the most amazing time lapses because you're able to use the additional frames to reconstruct motion blur, and it looks really pretty. So that's that. We've used Nests and MiFis frequently. You will have a big cell bill to do that if you have a limit there, but it'll be a lot less than whatever they're charging you at the venue.
And I use the Arlo system. That's security footage right there. So the thing I like about Arlo is that the cameras are wireless and self-powered on batteries. So you just stick them magnetically up somewhere. But there's a lot of solutions, obviously.
Oh, by the way, if you want to do a really cool time lapse, do video with a FLIR. So yeah, and then blend those together. There's that.
Wow.
If you do both of them at the same time and you get them kind of lay them over top of each other, you can flicker, and it's cool. Ooh,
Sounds like a fun recipe for Halloween coming up. Let's go to the next holiday. Next question.
Or holiday.
A holiday question here from Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Tallahassee, Florida. We talk about archiving photos and slides and the other. What is the most durable data storage? Magnetic hard drives, keeping them on film, SSD? How do we actually keep things for hundreds of years? Probably books.
Let's start with you, Mitch. You asked the question.
Quick anecdote on that. I just did a 100-year anniversary for my old high school video. And we had tons of footage going back into the 30s and 40s and even the 50s. The stuff that I didn't have was when they shot it on tape, people using camcorders. So that just gives you an idea that when you're archiving things is to find a mezzanine format that is going to last longer, probably data, because we ended up plenty of data files.
Jeffrey Powers.
Multiple copies. It's as simple as that. You don't trust one hard drive. You don't trust one SSD. You don't trust one anything. If hard drive, of course, a spinning hard drive could stop spinning. I had a hard drive do that last year, and I got tons of pictures that I didn't back up because I got COVID brain, and I just didn't do it. And that was stupid of me. But SSDs, they could get caught into a fire. They could get caught into something where they stop working. So the best thing to do is to get all the pictures done, put them on one device, make a copy on another device, send it to somebody else, make a copy. You could even put it on an SSD, put it into a bank vault, and I can't think of the box.
Safe deposit box.
Safety deposit box. We used to do that all the time with hard drives. We used to go to the bank and put our old hard drives in safety deposit boxes, and just back them up in multiple ways. That way, if one fails, you have another, and especially in 100 years.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm using archive paper, and printing those to it to keep the ones that matter the most. And then they go into, there's a couple steps to that. It's not just archive paper. It's archive paper and then in a protective package, and then in a somewhat controlled environment as far as where it goes, so it's doesn't get too warm or too wet or anything else. The standard is 321 for the we talked about this a little earlier, for your electronics, which means there's 3 locations, 2 on the ground that are in 2 different geographic locations and 1 in the cloud. And then the thing you have to think about is constantly moving your content forward. So I do this relatively often, not often, but every couple of years I'm moving stuff from old drives to new drives. And you just kind of get used to, these are the archive drives, right? And I don't keep every photo. When everything is important, nothing is. You have to decide these are the photos that matter from my I have a folder that I throw them into. Oh, I can remember that photo. And there's still hundreds of them, but it's not 150,000, which is what I have on my, like how many photos I've taken with my iPhone. So you have to decide, those, Apple does a pretty good job of keeping moving forward. But the other ones and by the way, like, all of my wedding photos are in my iPhoto account, which means that they're all just kind of floating along with Apple, and I have every single photo from that, all 3,000. So you can put a lot of stuff in there and just keep it and let it roll forward.
Courtney.
So when Apple goes under, Alex, all your memories are gone.
Yeah, I'm pretty worried about that. Yeah, because they're right on the edge. Like the thing about Apple is that you just never, every week you go, are they going to make it to the next week? I don't know.
Figure out how to make
We did
money.
have that moment 30 years ago, but it's been a while. So,
Chris Fenwick.
Oh, wait. I wasn't finished yet.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Well, then finish.
I shouldn't have started with the joke. Okay. I talked I went to a SMPTE meeting on archiving a few years ago, and this was after they'd gone to DIs, digital intermediates for film work. So everything was going in the computer, and they were doing effects and visual effects, and everything else was happening in post in digital and cinema. And I asked them how they were archiving because, this film may have a big value 200 years from now. And they all said what they were doing is they would do a film scan out to YCM separations. In other words, black and white film, yellow, cyan, and magenta separations for each color. And they put them in a salt mine so that they'll be around. That S-star-based film has been known to last hundreds of years. and they can reconstruct a full color image regardless of how far the technology has come. Who knows, in 150 years we may be using quantum memory sticks, and it's not going to be compatible with any of today's digital storage. So,
Chris Fenwick.
I think the interesting thing to examine in this discussion is what is the shelf life of those different medias. Like SSD, Paul at Slice, he was saying, should we move everything to SSD? I go, I don't know. They haven't really been around long enough. I know that we have hard drives. I have hard drives that are 25 years old that I still get data off of. Are they going to last 100 years? No, probably not, but neither am I, so I don't care. And frankly, the stuff that's on it isn't all that good. I mean, some of it, these family photos, that matters. But so how long do hard drives last? How long do SSD last? How long does paper last? Courtney, the thing about printing it out in 3 different colors, the CMY, who's going to be around that knows how to put that back into a normal picture? I mean, you have to leave an instruction manual on how to watch this thing. And here's the instructions on how to build
it. You can see it because it's an image on a piece of film.
You
don't have to decode it.
No, I know, but you got to mix those colors together. And then here's an instruction manual on how to build a film projector, because those are all gone. But I don't know what the shelf life of an SSD. Also, who was it? It said Jeffrey. I'll remind you something I talked about years ago. Hard drives, the number one problem with hard drives is what's called stiction, where it just doesn't spin. You power it up and it just goes, I don't want to spin. Pull the drive out, flip it upside down. I call it turtle spinning. Lay it on its back, spin it as fast as you can, and then grab it on the disk, on the desktop. And that usually introduces enough inertia to get those platters to spin again. Then power it up. I've done this easily a dozen times and saved hard drives.
Yeah, but this hard drive, I'm aware of those.
It could have bigger problems than that, but that's the number one thing that happens with drives.
It was one step from me putting it in the freezer, because once you put it in the freezer and then you try to pull the data, that's it. So once I have enough money, I'm going to actually take it to a company that can pull the data off successfully. So, but right now it's just sitting in a box in a temperature controlled environment.
Mitch Hill, finish us up.
Yeah, a couple of things to be on the lookout for is I shot a lot of footage on Betacam SP, even metal tape. And not too long ago, I was doing an archive and I was playing them back, and there's all kinds of hits on them just because, I guess, Betacam tape starts to deteriorate. And the only way I was able to fix it was to go in and check the odd and even frames and find the opposite frame and double it up on After Effects, and that was a real mess. The other thing to think of, remember jazz drives? I guarantee you that if you have a jazz drive with something important on it, it's gone. It's history, because they were made from bad parts in the first place. And even optical media has problems because it gets edge damage and other things start to happen. So be on the lookout of what you currently have right now and get it off and get it onto a better medium.
Important subject. And I like the curation part of this. Don't try to save everything. Let's go to the next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, Chris, how are you getting each application into loopback if the application doesn't support channel selection?
Mr. Fenwick.
The application in its totality has an audio output that goes into the Mac, presumably. And that's what loopback does, is it captures that audio output and then it brings it into loopback, and then I assign it into wherever it needs to go.
Okay, hope that helps. Don't forget, we can still vote on things. So if you see questions in the queue and they're down a little farther than you'd like, add a vote and see if you can get it up a little higher. Let's go to the next question.
From Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. Thoughts on the new Photodiox DLX parabolic focusing softbox? A low-cost breeze light?
And that's interesting. We're out of newshooter.com. I haven't seen that. Courtney, your thoughts. Have you looked?
Yeah, I have. And the difference between this one and most of the parabolic reflectors is this can move the light into the focal point of the parabola in the center, and then you can focus it by moving it closer and further away so that you can have a focusable beam of soft light. or you can use it like it's normally designed to use with a light on the outside. The problem with all of these is the thing is so big. These parabolas are so big, to mount them and use them in a normal room with an 8-foot ceiling is quite problematic to get it out of the shot of all the cameras. If you're using multiple cameras, the sound mixer's going to hate you because you've got a parabola that's right over the person. You can't, no way to get a boom microphone in there because the light is taking up all the space. It's nice for still work, but for sound work, it's difficult, and it creates a lot of other problems just because of the size of the reflector. But it gives you a nice, broad, soft source.
Very broad, soft source. I love those for still photography. Alex.
Sorry. The bulky, like exactly what Courtney said. It's just bulky. So I don't think that it would be something I'd probably use in production.
Yeah. So there you go. Let's move to the next question.
From David Brady in New York, New York. I'm looking to put together a test system at the office to shake out new gear. Is there any chance to get the source files used in the Zoom ISO rig for private and personal use?
Alex.
Reach out to me. I think we can probably make that work. It's not something we're going to make generally available, but you should reach out to me.
Next question.
And it's from Mike Potter in Hanover, Germany. For $99.99, the app Video Assist by Oran Studios Party Limited enables a USB-C containing iPad in combination with a USB capture card to act as an external monitor and recorder. Thoughts?
Alex.
Yeah, this was recommended by Guy last week, I think, and I bought it. So and it works really well. So it does. There's a free version of another one for the iPad that's free. Not great. Like, it's free, so it's great for the price, but it's just the way that they've set up the interface is really hard. This one's much better. It's got some, you've got some scopes, you've got some other things to look at. I think there's a lot of room to improve for $99, and I've already sent them some feedback. But I think it could be the beginning of something really great, to be able to have your iPad and have tons of controls and be able to draw on things and highlight things and everything else. So we'll see where it progresses to. But it's a cool app, and if you just need to turn your iPad into it, it's a lot cheaper than buying another monitor.
Let's go to the next question.
Ronnie Hofse from Tromsø, Norway, asking, I had a Samsung T7 fail on me today for the first time. Reason, not enough speed. It is used a lot, so is it possible to refresh it, or should I just let it do other tasks until it's time for it to ride into the sunset?
Alex, what say you?
It may not be a refresh problem. So what happens is the T7s and the T5s have a tendency, if you have a long transfer over 400 gigs, they're going to heat up and then they're going to slow down to almost nothing. And this has been something that we've hit over and over and over again. And so the way to use a T7 effectively is either be patient or don't try to move more than 400 gigs at a time. And so it's got some kind of heat issue that it just slows way down when it's doing kind of a constant transfer. We've had that problem since we turned them on 3 years ago or 4 years ago.
Mitchell?
Ronnie, I'd also consider making a move to the OWC Envoy series. They're very fast, very small, and work great.
Let's go to the next question.
Next one in from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. If you're watching slides with a family, how might you get the narration, sorry about the trash, recorded from multiple family members all at one time? Let's assume the slides are already in a digital format. How about Zoom?
Chris Fenwick.
Roscoe, I think this is a really neat idea. Let's say you had family distributed around, the country or world, whatever, and you wanted to step through the slides and just get people to talk about it. It might be a fun thing, maybe not, for, grandchildren to watch one day, to, hear their grandparents talk about that vacation they did, whatever. And yeah, you could do it on Zoom, pipe a slide deck into one Zoom instance and let people log on. I shudder at the idea of my mom participating in a Zoom meeting. She'd be kind of confused. But it's kind of an interesting idea to do that. People are going to step on each other, and it's not going to be easy to edit if you wanted to fix it. But it's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to me too. Courtney, any other ideas?
Yeah, go with Chris's idea if you're remotely, if you can't get together. But if you have a family reunion, our old friend, the Saramonic Blink 500 Pro with 4 transmitters and 1 receiver. That way you could place the transmitters around, maybe at each table for groups of family members, and then have them each recording into separate channels, and then you can, in the mix, separate out who's speaking and control the auto, and not an auto mix, but a post mix, and control the sound that way.
Okay, let's go to the next question.
Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. Apologies for not being specific about my mix minus question. I have the audio mix minus handled. What I need is a mix minus for videos, so I don't return guest video back to them. Do I need to get a Constellation?
Alex?
Yeah, I do think the Constellation series has this built into the switcher, so that's already been. So you can do it with the Constellation there. It's more complicated, but not impossible to do it, in other ways. But the way to do this with Extreme would be something that's probably using Isadora and Mix Effect Pro, or maybe we can get Adam to put something into Mix Effect Pro to do this. The issue that you have is what you need to do. We've done this with multiple switchers. Because what we've done is we've done things where we have 5 venues come in at one time, and then we have 5 venues coming at a time, and we're jumping back and forth between each venue, and the venues all have to have mix minus as they go, so that they can't see themselves come back in the feed that's going out. And the way we do that is you have to say, "Give me the last feed that wasn't me." That's what Zoom's doing, and when it's doing presenter, give me the last feed that is not me. And you have to set up that logic so that it's constantly turning everything on and off, and everybody has their own feeds there. It's not something that I've seen anything build that into the switcher. We've always done it externally, and it took us a little bit of work to make that happen. But it would be really interesting to see if Mix Effect Pro could just have that built in of setting a video mix minus for an output. I think Adam could build that, and that would be, because it wouldn't be hard to code it so that it just does it. It says this output is this input's mix minus, and then it just has a little bit of logic in there to just say never show yourself, always show the last thing that was shown before yourself. That's not a complicated logic tree. Anyway, it's interesting. Nope. And let's go to the next question.
Next question from Zian Ortiz in Florida. Again, when archiving photos and slides and others, how often should you update the file formats? Sometimes programs are no longer supported or unavailable to run on current systems. What are your thoughts on this?
Go ahead, Chris.
Definitely pay attention. I mean, I'm old enough. I've seen, file formats and codecs just disappear. Like, oh, that doesn't work anymore. So definitely pay attention. By and large, most stuff lasts decades, but they could become a problem.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, as Alex was saying earlier, is refresh. Once there's a new technology that comes for storing digital media on some new device, migrate everything to the new media to keep it fresh. Because, I have hard disks, they're IDE interfaces, and you can't find a computer that can interface to an old IDE drive very easily at all.
Yeah, you go ahead, Chris.
And just real quickly, I want to mention, no, never mind.
Next question.
Next question in from Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. Alex, does the Blackbird 8x8 HDMI matrix support downscaling of 4K input signals to 1080p output? I notice not all HDMI matrix can do this.
Yeah, I believe that I've never had to do it because I feed it what I want to get back out again. So I haven't really tried to get it to do any kind of downscaling. I looked at the manual, and it does say that it will downscale to 1080p 60 for 4 of the inputs. So 4 of the inputs, it will actually do the downscaling. So I think that's the maximum there. So you can get some downscaling, but it's not scaling across all of them. But I haven't tried that again because I tend to be very kind of systematic about stuff, and I don't want to necessarily mix and match my stuff. so anyway, so that's how I think through that process. We're going to talk about camera sensors here in just a minute. But I just want to remind you that, of course, we have OWC talking about storage here tomorrow. So we'll be talking about that, the jellyfish and lots of big storage. And so there's been a request to talk about storage, and these guys are the experts at it. So they're going to be coming in and joining us and talking about that. On Saturday, of course, we have just general Q&A, but we're doing testing with HDR and 5.1 and 4K. So you'll see a little bit of those tests there. On Sunday, of course, is introspection, where we just you can ask concerns, comments, questions, etc. So go ahead and bring those comments and concerns with you. And a quick reminder that we are looking for panelists. You can find out more if you fill out a form at officehours.global/panelists. Let's go ahead and jump into the second hour. Welcome back to the second hour. And we're going to be talking about sensors. So camera sensors, and why we pay attention to some sensors and not other sensors. And I think that it's important because, and we're specifically talking about camera sensors. There's lots of sensors that you could. There's scientific sensors. There's all kinds of heat sensors. There's low light sensors. But what we're talking about today are camera sensors, and the things that we are thinking about as we start to make a decision about what's the next camera we're going to buy. And we have to make lots of choices when it comes to those camera sensors. And so if you've got questions about sensors, go ahead and throw those in. And so we'll kind of discuss it. Now, I think we had some slide decks, but I don't know if they're here right now. So we're just going to jump into the drawing portion of this puzzle here. There's a couple things when you're thinking about sensors that are both, some of them are historical in the sense that we can't really use them anymore. So for instance, for a long time we had CCDs, and the CCDs were 3-chip. Well, typically, I mean, you could have 1 chip, but a lot of us had 3-chip CCDs, and these were all global shutter. So what that meant was it charged the entire sensor at one time, and then grabbed all the data out of it. So the way to scale, this was decided sometime, I don't know, 15 years ago, that the only way we're going to be able to scale the quality of the chip was to move to a CMOS chip, and that's what almost all cameras sit on now. And CMOS chips can be a global shutter or a rolling shutter. The difference between those, we'll just talk about shutters here for just a second, is how it reads that chip. And the way to think about the chip is you don't think about it as a single sensor. It's a bunch of photosites. So basically you have a chip. Let's see here. If I turn this on, am I going to get... give me 1 second here. Sorry, we had a little change in the back end, and I'm not sure exactly what happened. So I'm just dancing along here for a second. Well, actually, while I do this, I'm going to let Courtney talk a little bit about sensors, just the mechanical. I'm just going to throw Courtney right into the thing here. Just talk a little bit about how the sensors actually work.
I hear that bus coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Sensors work. CMOS sensors work. They have what's called a Bayer filter for color, which is it's a single sensor area with little tiny filters for red, green, and blue in front of each of the pixel sensors, and each of those pixel sensors has a light-sensitive element and a transistor, and as the light hits that comes through the filter for a red, green, or blue. And usually there's twice as many green sites as there are red and blue. It will store the voltage for each individual pixel, and then it is scanned out. And it depends on whether it's global shutter or progressive shutter, progressive readout. Either it'll read it out a line at a time, and that gives you the rolling shutter effect, or it'll freeze. It'll have a signal that will basically turn off all the transistors that are capturing those voltages to the individual pixels at the same moment in time, so that it can then be read out, so that all of the voltages that were captured at the same instant. That way, that's the global shutter. So you don't get any latency from the top of the frame to the bottom of the frame, which is what causes you that jello effect if the camera's moving, etc. And then, of course, those R, G, and B values are stored in a matrix of data and output as separate selections of values. and recompile later with a debarring filter that reconstructs your color image from the individual red, green, and blue filters. And it uses weights because there's more green sensor sites than there are red and blue.
And it's actually it's 50% of the sensor sites are green, 25% red, 25% blue, typically. So, and this is, by the way, why you should almost always use a green screen. so if you say, should I use green or blue? And there are reasons to use blue in darker, if you're doing like a darker scene, in some cases where people are wearing green, those types of things. But for the most part, blue green is the right way to do that because there's more. It's specifically because the sensors populate that better. Now, the thing to remember also is that the sensor itself is, if you think about the sensor, it is just grayscale. That there's just each sensor site. If we think about it, so think about a sensor here. Each one of these is just a IC light. But what happens is that they are then filters are added to them. So you have, I'm not going to do the exact pattern, but you get the idea: green, red, and blue. It's not that pattern, but the point is that there's filters on top of each one of those that are filtering out only that color, or allowing you to only have that color, so that it's just seeing red or just seeing green. But the sensor itself is just a black and white sensor with these filters sitting on top. Now, again, as Courtney said, when you're charging it, is it going down line by line, or is it grabbing it all at one time? That's a pretty big deal there. Courtney has the pattern, the actual pattern that we're looking that we need there. Now the one thing that's important to understand, because if you ever look at a raw photo or a raw output of these, is everything looks a little out of focus, and the reason for that is because all of these pixels are next to each other, not on top of each other. There is one chip that puts them on top of each other. It's called the Foveon. The Foveon chip, which I think, is it Fuji or Sigma has they're the only ones that use that chip. But those they put red, green, and blue on top of each other, and that does produce a sharper image. So almost all cameras, to some degree, will have some sharpening added back into them, because they, the sharpening basically gives you the impression of being sharp by basically accentuating the edges, and that's using a high pass filter and so on and so forth. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you can. There are, like the original CCD, which uses a different technology for reading out it was charge coupled device for reading out the individual photon sites. There are 3-chip cameras that use CMOS as well, but they have a smaller target size because you're not interleaving all the 3 colors on a single plane. And those type since they have a smaller target size, they have a prism that separates the red, green, and blue into the individual light paths, into individual chips, one for red, one for green, one for blue. And then because of the smaller sensor size, your depth of field is much greater, so you don't have that narrow depth of field you have in the large sensor size of the CMOS chips.
And depth of field is another important subject. So a lot of us talk about sensor size. Sensor size gives you 2 main advantages. One is the larger the sensor, the larger the sensor site. So a sensor site is each one of these little sites on the sensor, little buckets, that digital buckets that are sitting there grabbing onto the light. The larger they are, the less errata. So the less that they're going to be wrong about what they're looking at, especially at low light. When there's not much light, the error level goes up, in what the photo site's seeing. So the larger the photo sites, the more sensitive they are to light, because they have less of a chance. You're getting down into the noise of the sensor when it gets really dark, and so you end up with a lot of grain and just it's trying to figure out what's there. Whereas if the sensor site is larger, it will be able to absorb that and be more accurate. On the far end of that, you see things like the Canon ME20. So the Canon ME20 is from a commercially available device, it's probably the lowest light system that we use. It's about $20,000 for the camera, and it is a full frame sensor, but only 1080p. So instead of being a camera sensor that might do 24 megapixel or a 4K sensor, it is a 1080p sensor at full frame size, and that means the photo sites on average are 7 times bigger than a regular photo site that you would see in a regular camera. And the result of that is a ISO of 4 million and a usable ISO of about 1 million. We've done shows where we actually had to warn the person shooting, this was in Tanzania, that the hyenas were getting very close. And they didn't, because they couldn't see them, but we could. It's just like we were on the other end going, hyenas are really right in front of you, like just so you know that they're right there. And so these cameras can be very, very, very low light. So that photo sight is important. So the problem you get into is you see like a big frame, and this is where you see these problems related to one of the issues that you'll get into here is that if you get the Blackmagic 12K is a great camera, but one of the challenges that it has is that it's using a Super 35 sensor. And then it put 12K, it put a 12K image into a Super 35 sensor. And the issue there is that you're packing those pixels they're packing each one of those photo sites really close together. And that tends to lower its ability to handle low light as well as it could have otherwise. So you're kind of balancing that process. The second thing, of course, that the larger sensor size does is give you a more shallow depth of field. And so depth of field is driven by that. The three things that really drive your depth of field is your lens length, like how long the length of your lens or how much of a zoom you have on it. The second is your aperture size, so how big the aperture is, and then finally the size of your sensor. As the sensor gets larger, of course, your depth of field gets shorter. And the way you want to think about all of those is really think about if you think about the sensor, but don't think about the sensor as much as think about the sensor here, and then you have a photo site that's there, and you want to think about the aperture and also the size of the sensor is controlling let's just say a pyramid like this that's going up like this. This pyramid, when you open up the aperture or you have a larger sensor, gets wider, and as you make it, if you have a smaller sensor or a smaller aperture, think of it as getting much thinner. And so you have a thinner triangle or a thinner pyramid or a wider pyramid. And why that's important is as you widen that pyramid out, there's only one place that's purely in focus, but it's how big. If you think about this pyramid here, again, if you think about this and don't think about the pixel as a point, think about it as a square that goes up, and the bigger that square is, as this gets wider, that square can only go up so much before you start. That's a whole pixel. So when it's getting out of focus, it's in the focus in relationship to one pixel. So that as that pyramid gets much thinner, you can go way up and down it, and it's still not losing focus. It's losing focus, but not larger than one pixel as far as the calculation goes. And so what happens is the sensor size, as it gets smaller, of course that pyramid gets thinner, and then everything stays in focus. And so a lot of us would prefer not to do that. And the big thing is the depth of field allows us to separate ourselves from the background. So the you can see with mine, in my wall of depreciation, I have it falls off, and it could fall off a lot faster if I had again, I'm at a 1.8 right now on a Super 35 sensor. At a full size sensor, this would probably be half it'd be twice the drop out of focus there. And so as we look at those things, we want to, you make those decisions. A lot of us, it doesn't always mean you're looking for the largest sensor. So for instance, if you watch football, if you watch American football at least, one of the things you'll see a really short depth of field running around on a steady camera when they score a touchdown or when they're about to go away. You suddenly see this really short depth of field, and what they're doing is I think it's a Sony A7S or something like that on a steady cam. I mean, they might be using something different now, but they were when they first tested it. And they're doing these. They have these Steadicam shots. Everybody's really close. They're only 20 feet away, and everything's short depth of field, and it suddenly looks like a film, and that's great. That is completely impractical for the rest of the game, because the other thing that we were talking about is focal length. As focal length increases, the depth of field gets shorter as well. And the issue that you get into with your chips is that you start to that you can't keep focus. If you look at the short depth of field in a football game, that's on a 2/3 inch chip. That's not a very large chip that is going to those camera sensors, and it can't get larger. It cannot get larger, and the reason it cannot get larger is because they're shooting thousands of millimeters. It's a long shot. These are huge 90x box lenses, 100 x box lenses that are shooting these long shots, and that depth of field, even with that chip size, is getting just short enough that someone can manage it. If you put a Super 35 in, there'd be almost nothing in focus ever. And so the way we think of that is that I shoot almost everything at Super 35 or higher. So, but that's all under 75 feet. So at 75 feet, we shift down to 2/3 inch chips. And the reason we do that is so that we can maintain focus. So those are the things that we kind of take into account as we start to think about those chip sizes, as we start to put those together. Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, this is a full frame sensor with a 2470 lens at 2.8 aperture. I've got it fully open. And to be able to get this.
And that's a good example of, that one of the advantages of getting a larger sensor is that you can close that lens down. You can get a lens that, like, for instance, it's very hard to get a zoom lens that goes below 2.8. It's not impossible, but it's very expensive. And so when you go up to a full frame sensor, and I'm thinking eventually I'll get a full frame. I'm kind of waiting to see, Sony now has this new LR one, which is it's basically the full frame sensor that we see on the Sony cameras, except it's on like a little, it looks like a webcam size. It's really designed to go on drones. I want to see if that works, and if I can actually make that work as a webcam. So I'm waiting to see if that. I don't think it's out yet, so I haven't been able to test it. But I am thinking about going to that. But a lot of the reason is that I can go to a 2.8 lens. It's not that I can go to 1.4 at a full frame, because that'll be nothing in focus again. I mean, this will just look like a wash behind me. And so, but it does let you go down a little bit and still get that shorter depth of field. And, again, with a lot of cameras, for instance, cameras are often sharpest in about the middle, like 5.6. And so you can have the sharpest lens if you're closing down a little bit to make that work. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've spec'd broadcast cameras, Alex. I was going to ask you, are all these sports-related to broadcast cameras 3-chip with a prism block to get the smaller sensor size so that they can have more depth of field, or are they? No, they're I believe, still using a CMOS, a single CMOS chip as opposed to 3 CMOS chips.
I don't think they're using. I can look. Yeah. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Because with a single one, they got to takes up 3-4 times the area of a 3-chip camera for each individual color to get the same resolution of pixels. So.
Yeah, I am not certain. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Can we chat about cropping sensors?
Yeah, so what you're doing there is, you have a full frame sensor, and then what you are doing when you crop it, it just, so there's a couple different ways to go out to a smaller resolution. So let's say you have a 4K sensor and you want to go out at 1080p. There's 2 ways to do that. You can either scale it down and send it out, or you can crop the sensor. The advantage of cropping the sensor it's actually, because the lens is designed for typically designed for the larger sensor, you're cutting into the center of that lens, which means it's basically like adding focal length to it. So you're basically going, we're only using the center part of the sensor, which means you're only using the center part of the lens, which means it's as if it was, and typically if you go from a full frame to a Super 35, I think that crop factor is like 1.6 or something like that. So it's like adding on to the end of your lens. And a lot of times we make that calculation for sensors, because if we get a lens that's designed for a full frame sensor, we can multiply it. I mean, I don't multiply by 1.6. I just do 1.5 because it's easier to do in my head. And so I get roughly, I'm roughly at this focal length. And so we use the crop sensor sometimes to buy more out of a lens. So especially when you're using larger frame. So if you're using a Super 35, or there are limits once you go to Super 35 and above, there are limits to what lenses you have available to you. And so oftentimes the longest lens that we can put on our cameras is a Canon 50-1000, which has also got I think a 1.5 extender in it. And then so you can get up to about 1500. And then we might, if you're really shooting, and this is a long distance, if you're shooting, 150 feet away or something, you might crop the sensor, and then it'll buy you more. It'll get you out a little bit further, through that lens. And so cropping the sensor is a fast way to get. It also takes less processing. So what they're doing on the camera is so some cameras they'll let you crop, they won't let you scale in real time because they don't have the processing to do that. Most don't do that anymore, but that's something you have to think about. But cropping the sensor is going to extend the focal length of your lens, but you're cropping down to 1080p or whatever. The advantage of, again, one of the advantages of taking the full frame and then scaling down, you're not going to get that extended lens length. And we've done this, so for instance, we just did this last week. For a show in New York, the FR7, the end of the lens on the FR7 is the 35-128, I think, is the only one for zoom, and we cropped it. So because we only need a 1080p show, so you do a crop on that lens, and that extends the lens out so that the cameras could be a little further back, and we'd still get the shots we were looking for. So you can, that's how we're extending that FR7 a little bit beyond while we're waiting for Sony to give us longer lenses for that camera. So but even then, we'll just find another way to crop that sensor, to go back out again. So crop sensors can get you a little bit more on the lens. What you give up is the opportunity to have a oversample. So what we do with oversampling is if I shoot a bigger image than I need and then I sample it down, what I end up with is a smoother image at the end, because it's basically using bicubic interpolation. So it's looking at all the pixels around it, and it takes a pixel, and it's got to figure out, I've got, the simplest way to think about this is that I have, I have 4 pixels that I'm now going to make into, 2, right? 2 pixels, or actually 1 pixel. So if I look at these, if I have these 4 pixels here, and I'm going to take it down to, a single pixel, that single pixel is going to be an average and there's a lot of different ways of interpolating that average of those 4 pixels. So I'm going to bring them down. When I do that, as it calculates that, it oftentimes averages out a lot of the grain. So you get rid of a lot of grain and that grain can be generated because it's low light. It can be generated because there's a lot of reasons it can happen. So shooting in a chip, one of the things people make a mistake of is they go, well, I have an 8K camera or a 4K camera, but I only need 1080p. So I'm only going to shoot it I'm going to crop it, or I'm going to only, get that. But the advantage of the advantage of doing a 4K image or an 8K image or a 12K image of your footage is not that you may use it. And people go, I'm never going to use it at 12K. Yeah, but the 1080p will look amazing, or the 4K will look amazing. If you scale that down, it's going to make it really milky and very smooth, because you're getting rid of all of the errata that was in there. You're averaging that all out as you scale it down. So there are advantages to shooting at the higher resolution and scaling down later, as opposed to crop censoring. When you crop censor, you're still getting the raw crop, the raw camera data, which may be what you want. Again, it extends it, but I wouldn't do it automatically. I would want that extra data if I could have it. Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
One last question. What is the naming convention? I'm always confused by the annotation for sensor size, like 1/2, or is it?
It's a ratio.
It's a ratio.
Sometimes they here's the worst part, is sometimes they give you the actual size. It is 1 inch over, or 1 over something for the, it's in inches of all things. There are some conversions online to tell you how many millimeters. It's the diagonal size of the chip. So that's the, so if you're thinking about that chip there, the size of the sensor is is this distance, right? Just like your TV, and so that typically is the size there. When you see when you see I'm sorry, because it's a really funny thing to look at. If you see 1/3, of course, it's 1/3 chip. 1/3 inch is this distance. That's a really bad 3. Sorry about that. But the one that I find funny is like 1/2.6 is a really popular one right now, and I think it literally. I mean, it's still basically 1/3. It's a little better than 1/3, but I think that it actually is. I feel like what they did was they went 1/2.6 because it confuses people. They can no longer do the math and when I see 1/2.6 or 1/2.8, I'm just like, okay, it's a 1/3 inch chip. Like it's you're fiddling with it, and the reason for that is that people learned not to buy 1/3 inch chips a while ago because they have a higher chance. 1/3, and for a lot of times we had corporate cameras that were 1/4. And number one is your depth of field is almost infinite. So everything's going to be sharp. And a lot of your webcams are like that. Number two is that they're much less resistant to grain. So you see a lot more grain in low light, and the low light performance is going to be lower. So as those chips get bigger, then it starts to make a big difference. And so I would say that for a web camera, I lean into a 1/2 inch chip is kind of table stakes. Like if I see 1.2, 1/2 point, if there's a point after the 2, I'm done. Like there's nothing there for me. And so 1/2 inch chip, and that has to do with color representation, grain, all those things. And then what I really, what we're hoping to see is some webcams to start coming out at 1 inch. I think that there's a market for that, and that's what and so I feel like Sony is so close with the LR1 that I feel like it'll be it's expensive, but I think that someone could see, we could do a Super 35 web camera or something like that. A lot of those chips have become a lot less expensive, and Sony makes chips that are less expensive there, and I think that there is an appetite for Super 35 webcams. I know it sounds crazy, but it's crazy how much we're spending on cameras that do a whole, like the camera that I'm using right now, a Super 35. It's an $800 camera. It does so many things I don't need it to do. And so I just need the sensor and the lens mount, on it to do what it needs to do. And Sony could probably drop that from an $800 camera down to a $500 camera or a $400 camera if they just got rid of everything else that I didn't need, and so that's the we're hoping to see Sony go to somewhere down that path. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
Chuck Japley from New York City asking, I want to upgrade my setup from a Canon camcorder with a 1-inch sensor to a mirrorless camera with a full-frame sensor. How much better is the resolution low light work on the mirrorless?
It's not really the mirrorless that's going to make the mirrorless isn't going to change the low light. It's the size of the sensor and the quality of the sensor. And so it is your resolution. It depends on what you're doing with it, but typically at full frame, you're going to get at least 4K, if not 6K or even 8K coming into that full frame sensor. Your low light is going to be better than the 1 inch. It is, but the mirrorless is not necessarily the thing that makes the difference. It's the quality of that sensor. Next question.
James Babbitt from San Diego, California. Has anyone on the panel noticed any differences in the picture quality of the iPhone 15 Pro Max versus the iPhone 14 Pro Max?
I have both of them. They're right here, hugging at the moment. The 15 is better. I don't know if at the same focal length if it's better, but being able to go to 5x definitely makes a difference. So the 5x lens is a game changer in my opinion. There's a lot of things that I wanted to step a little closer to and I use the 5x all the time. So I think that it works really well. Next question.
Ronnie Hofsoy from Tromsø, Norway. Which of the newest Blackmagic cameras has sensors that will match our URSA Broadcast G2s and will do a great job in virtual production scenario on a green screen? Maybe share Canon EF mount lenses as well?
The big thing I would look at there is that, I think that I don't know if they'll all match. As Blackmagic goes up, they're going to generally move to they're going to change the way the chips work a little bit as they keep on moving forward. So, I think that that's something you kind of have to take into account. The big thing you want to think about there is even if you're doing a 1080p show, is resolution matters when it comes to green screen, because remember that the other thing that's going on is the subsystem inside the camera is a 422 subsystem, not a 444 subsystem, at least in Blackmagic. This camera right here, like for instance, that's CCD, that's a Sony F950, and it is CCD and it's 444. So it has all the, so at 1080p, it was capable of doing, every pixel is being, can be keyed. The problem with a 422 setup, and of course 424, what that means is that for every 4 pixels of black and white information, I only get 2 pixels of 422, would mean I only get 2 of the pixels are going to be color. So it's half resolution of that color. And what that leads to is when you pull a green screen with 422, you're going to get a little bit of stair stepping because you're literally keying half of the resolution. The way to get around that is to shoot a 4K for a 1080p frame. So if you shoot 4K at a 1080p and then go down, you're going to end up with a something that is very equivalent to 444 for that. So I would look at a 4K camera that you're going to do in a 4K Ultimate. Even if you may look at, I'm doing a 1080p show, but you want to do it if you can, key it in 4K, you'll get a much better resolution. Where you're going to see that typically is going to be hair. Hair is going to be much better represented at 444 than it is at 422. That's where we really see it. And soft edges, hair, those are the things that pops out in. But I don't think that, I think that your broadcast cameras that are Super 35, I'm really excited to see that we saw one camera show up at full frame from Blackmagic. So I hopefully we'll see more of that. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine from Panama City, Panama. What is the difference of having a bigger sensor camera comparing between 1 inch versus 1/3, and why is 1 inch better?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, it depends if you're shooting, as was said earlier, high-speed sports where you can't predict where the focus is going to be, or you have really long lenses. The smaller size, the 1/3 inch, is probably better because you have a much better depth of field. The 1 inch gives you a much shallower depth of field, and it also gives you probably that 1 inch sensor gives you a faster sensor. In other words, it can work a lot better in low-level light. So you can shoot in a lot less fully illuminated. It takes a lot more light to illuminate a 1/3 inch sensor than it does a 1 inch sensor usually, because the transistor that is in each photo site sits usually on the glass of the sensor, and it blocks some of the light hitting the photoresist or the photodiode that is beneath it. So that the smaller the sensor, the smaller the transistors have to be to block less of the light, and that way the ratio of the size of the transistor to the size of the photoreceptor determines how fast the sensor is or how much light it can build up to capture its image.
Yeah, so you're definitely going to get typically much better low light performance, a higher dynamic range. We didn't talk about dynamic range, but that's another thing you want to look at when you're looking at the chips. Is what kind of dynamic range? I mean, you should see at least 12 stops, and some of the chips are going up to about 18 stops of dynamic range, and so those are other things to kind of consider. Another thing to think about is whether it's dual ISO or not, and that may not be as much of the chip as the processing. So sometimes it will lean one way or the other, so that you have a low ISO and a high ISO, and so if you're going to low light, you can jump to that higher ISO. And that's a whole nother second hour, like explaining the dynamic range of a chip. Anyway, next question.
Douglas Carmichael asking, how does the optical low-pass filter affect the performance of a camera sensor?
It's not necessarily the performance, but what a low-pass filter does is it gets rid of moiré. So it doesn't. There's patterns that we can see. And the two places that we see moiré the most are tight patterns on people's clothing, and that can be a texture on someone. So you'll see this kind of almost rainbow effect go across these kind of curves on someone's shirt, and that can be from a tight pinstripe, some checkered, usually lots of contrast and a regular pattern. will tend to create a moire pattern across it. And so you see those on certain, again, certain textures and types of fabric, certain types of prints. And then the one that we see the most right now is LED walls. So LED walls will pick up that a lot. And without a low-pass filter, without the optical low-pass filter, you will often see moire going across these LED walls in a way that you don't see without it, or with it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, what Alex said, it forms kind of a random dithering to break up the regular pattern of, like anything with like an LED wall that has a regular pattern coming in. So it'll dither it a little bit so that the pattern is disturbed enough or defocused enough so that it doesn't create a moire.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, if you want to see a good example of a bad moire, check out CNN. They have a new studio set up with these giant LED screens. And anytime to do a close-up shot of one of the talent, especially one to the left or to the right, the moire is just absolutely out of control.
I don't understand how they thought that was okay when they tested it. You just
they chose badly.
They chose badly, and I guess they're like, okay, well, we spent $6 million, so now we're gonna eat it for the next 2 years or something. I don't know. All of the networks have done this to some degree, and I just feel like somebody just doesn't care. Like or they're just like they saw it. And we warn people all the time, like, hey, if you're going to put an LED back there, you're going to have to do a lot of testing, with that LED, and make sure that you're not testing with one panel. Like, you got to put up a 10-foot by 10-foot square behind someone and show your graphics and see how that's going to look, because it's not going to look good. And I think that like ABC is just barely, after a decade of looking, I can't even say it on the air. They're slowly getting some of their sets up to the point where they're not a complete disaster. And I just don't understand how that they thought that was okay. It's, and they see it. I mean, we see it it has gotten better. But even in some of the, Sunday Night Football and other things like that, we saw, we'd see these textures and moire and everything else. And I guess they just feel like the average consumer, because here's the problem. They'll say, because, no one's complaining about it. They're not getting people, they're not getting a bunch of, comments about it. Just because people don't complain doesn't mean they don't notice it. And the worst part is sometimes they don't notice it, but they still subconsciously make decisions about it. And so it undermines your standing with your viewers. And it doesn't mean that your viewers not, again, short depth of field. Most people don't know what short depth of field means, but they're making decisions about the quality of the content based on that depth of field. And I can tell you, when my kids were very small, they would immediately know whether they were watching broadcast or YouTube. Like, they just, and I asked them, they're like, oh, that's a broadcast channel. And they just skip through it. They would just skip past it. Oh, that's broadcast. That's broadcast. And this is like, we're talking about 8-year-olds and just knowing exactly what they're looking like. Is this native or not native to them? That's how they, they didn't say it that way. It's just like, is it our content or not? I think is kind of how they refer to it.
Yeah. The wide shots are fine. And that's obviously how they tested it. But as soon as they're going on a one shot, forget it.
Well, what I was going to say is that they make decisions about that. At 8-year-old, they didn't know why. But what it was is depth of field. Like, you could see that it was sharp behind them, soft behind them, and they made, and this is now broadcast has slowly closed that gap. But for a long time, it was very easy, and they didn't know why, but they just knew that it was different, and they knew why it was different. Go ahead, Courtney.
Also, we're at the point of transitioning from 1080p to 4K. And that transition has caught a lot of people because they built their set based on 1080p, and now they've got new 4K cameras in with much higher resolution sensors in them. And so the moire is going to be a lot worse with a high resolution sensor on a 1080p screen. So that's, I think, where a lot of them are getting caught in that transition. They can't afford to update the sets.
I'll be honest, it's been bad at 1080i for a long time. Like, the sets, and again, the willingness of broadcasters to look so bad in public always amazes me. Like, it's like, you're CNN. Anyway, next question.
Ike Potter from Hanover, Germany. A lens border's image quality might be a lower, for example, chromatic aberration and vignetting. Is it worth it to put a full-frame lens on an APS-C sensor containing a camera like the ZV E-10 instead of the same cheaper APS-C lens?
I buy all my lenses at full frame just so that I know, because lenses are expensive. You know, you date the sensor and you marry the lens. You're moving through cameras a lot. You may not move through those lenses a lot, and so you want to. I generally buy all full frame lenses, knowing that there's a crop factor to them, and knowing that if I ever get, what I never want is an APS, a pile of APS lenses when I buy my full frame sensor, because that means I get to buy them all again, and that's something I'm not interested in. Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, this is a ZV E-10 with a power to zoom 16 to 35G lens, and it's basically stretched on an APS-C. So it's actually like a little bit longer lens.
And can you control the zoom remotely on that lens?
Can indeed, and it has the paddle on the top so that I can control it there. Nice. I can do it from the software. I can do it from the Monitor Plus software and the remote software from Sony. So yes, and yes.
Next question.
Next question from Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. What is a global shutter, and why is this necessary?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, we spoke of this a little earlier. Global shutter prevents the jello effect because it captures the entire frame from top to bottom at a single moment in time, within less than a frame of far less than a frame of time, 24th of a second or a 30th of a second. So it has a means of freezing basically the data that is stored in those sensors, and then it reads it out serially. But it freezes it all at the same time so that it's not continuing to capture information as it reads it out. A non-global shutter will be reading it out, but it'll still be capturing, as you read it out, the pixels at the top of the frame, you're storing those data values, but the pixels at the bottom of the frame are still getting light in. And so if things move, the image that is on those pixels in the bottom can change from the top of the frame to the bottom of the frame. This causes the irregularities in verticals that you'll see on a non-global shutter camera. So it's best to have global shutter to prevent that, especially if you have anything with a moving camera horizontally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you pretty much, if you're shooting an action film or anything in a car or anything else that's moving, you kind of, like if you're thinking about film production or high-end production, global shutter you have to have. Like you can't say, oh, I'm going to shoot that. You really have to shoot it all in global shutter. People will tell you that you don't, but there's a lot of correction that's required otherwise, and it's never quite right. Next question.
David Brady in New York, New York. I modified a Fisher-Price PXL2000 to put out baseband video and sold that camera for about $1,500 to a guy in Japan. Picture quality was abysmal, but it gets a look that you can't reproduce digitally. What other retro cameras are still viable?
Mitchell?
Yeah, I used to have this old Technicolor black and white camera that used actual audio cassettes to record, and it made some amazing pictures in black and white. But other than that, I haven't played with any old stuff yet.
Good, Courtney.
I used to work with a lot of commercial directors, and we would always shoot in 35 millimeter film. But I had one commercial director that loved to shoot in Super 8. He'd just do pieces. He'd pull out his little Beaulieu Super 8 camera and shoot a lot of pieces in Super 8 because he liked that degraded quality. It gave it a edge, which is what all the commercial producers were looking for, something of an edge so that all their commercials don't look the same. Probably the same reason that this guy is going for the Fisher-Price. He needs to have something that looks different. These days, most editorial packages have plugins that can make it look like bad VHS or, that will degrade your, super high resolution, IMAX imagery to make it look like it came off of a Fisher-Price camera.
I'm trying to remember who I used to have, and it's just, who made there was a company that makes the little lenses for your camera, and they have the screws on the corners, and you can move them back and forth. And I used to use them. I used to have a lot of fun with them. And
Lens Baby.
Yeah, Lens Baby.
Lens Baby.
Yeah. Lens Baby had these little, it's like a little, you could twist it and bend it, and what it would do is it would take the plane that's it's a bellows lens, like a little bellows lens for it, and I think it's Notaflex. Will also, they make big bellows. I have this. I do want to get a bellows for a Blackmagic camera, they have them, Super 35, they have Canon mount bellows, and I think it's Notaflex that makes them. And I don't know why, but the idea of shooting, kind of tilt lens of ants or something in 12K, it's absurd, and I want to do it. And we'll talk about lenses someday, but but I think it's more of a lens thing than a camera thing at this point, as far as what might be worth taking video with, at least. Next question.
Rob Collins in Kansas City, Missouri. Is there any sensor difference for a high-speed camera versus a normal speed, or is the difference somewhere else in the camera system?
Mitchell?
I love Phantom. I think it's the coolest thing in the world to shoot that super high speed. And there's a huge difference in everything, including you got to flood a whole lot more light on the subject to be able to shoot high speed.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's something different. I mean, there's probably something different, but the big thing is how it's the refresh. The sensors are different because they have to be able to accept a super high. They have to be able to accept voltage and discharge voltage at a very high rate. The bigger problem is dealing with the throughput. So it's generating an enormous amount of data all at one time, and so it's the flash memory. I know when the Phantoms first came out, they're much better now. But when they first came out, they have these cards in them. The very first Phantom, and it would have all these cards, and it would just charge all the cards. You could only get a couple seconds worth of footage because that's what they could fill, and then it would take a while. Then you wait for a little while for them to slowly push that back out through the pipeline. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, he's right. The speed at which you could read the data out is a problem, and the speed at which the photosensor can capture has to be able to capture in a very short period of time to capture at a very high speed. And what a lot of them would do is to shoot a super high, the higher the frame rate, the lower the resolution. So it would divide up that sensor into sub areas, so that we would have 4 frames, 4 or 5 frames across and 5 frames down of a full res sensor. So you would lower your resolution to get the higher frame rate, and then the electronics could read out that frame as if it were just a single frame of full frame, but it's actually getting 25 frames at one time instead of just one.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asking, a camera person covering a SpaceX launch mentioned the intense light overloaded the camera's sensor. How might that overload affect the image, and what would you do to mitigate it?
Typically, I mean, again, the problem you have there is, of course, your shutter speed can only get to be so, especially if you're shooting film. So generally, unless you're turning your shutter up way past the normal, your shutter is usually at what we call 180 degrees, or it's basically, it's open half the time so if if you're shooting 60 frames a second, your shutter is at 120. And you're kind of pegged there. Otherwise, it starts to look very stuttery because the motion blur doesn't match the frame rate or what we expect from that frame rate. So the way we handle that is typically ND filters. The challenge you get into with ND is, so these are neutral density filters. And so the way we are able to open our aperture back up, or be able to get something more light in, like for instance, for a filter for the sun is almost opaque. Like it's nearly opaque. You can put it on your camera and you'll be able to see the sunspots and the sun itself and everything else. But you can see that because we put this filter on the front that cuts out almost all of it. And ND filters, you can have various numbers of stops of ND filters. The challenge you get into with this is that you have a launch and you need an ND filter at one level for a moment. So it's darker, and then suddenly there's a bright light and you have to close that ND filter down. There's a couple different ways of doing that. One way to do that is to have a variable ND filter that you can open up. You can swing it, and open that up. I don't think that the image quality is as high with that, but you can get a variable ND filter there. And then cameras have their own NDs built into them. So some cameras will have them, so you can swing them there, and it can be a combination of the two. So that's the other thing. And if you get those ND filters in, so that the other thing you can do is get the ND filters in, and then use your f-stop, so that the f-stop is kind of like you can scale it all back, so that you still can close down on the f-stop when you need to. So if you have the ND dark enough that you're wide open at the very beginning, you may be between switching your ND filters and opening up your f-stop or closing your f-stop. You can and making that aperture smaller. All of those things can allow you to adjust during something that's changing a lot. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and there's also, you don't want to set it necessarily on automatic exposure, because that's going to bite you. If you have a good exposure, let's say it's dawn and you get a nice picture of the rocket sitting on the launch pad, and then as soon as it goes up, it becomes so bright, the camera stops down to the point that you just see the image of the flame properly exposed, but everything else goes dark. So you have to choose something in between there. And a lot of times, I do like I do in sound. If you have a super loud sound that you're trying to record and there's dialogue on either side of it, let's say, you can't mix down the sound levels so that you record the gunshots properly without them going over, and still record the dialogue. So usually we'll just let the gunshots go over, and you'll use some type of brick wall limiter to prevent that from going over 100%. And you can do the same thing in video as a brick wall limiter to prevent it going. That'll top it off at 100%, and you'll just let the flame burn out. You won't see a lot of detail in it, but at least you'll still be able to see the rocket as it goes up. So that's one method of handling it, or it can be a careful balance. The problem with rocket launches is if it's your first one, you don't know. You only get one chance at it. And so guessing whether the right amount of ND to use and still get a usable image without it going over, can be very tricky. It takes experience and doing it more than once or maybe multiple cameras to get it correct the first and only time.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Another example of that is shooting fireworks. It's pretty tricky. And I usually open the lens all the way up, put a ND filter on it, and seems to work okay. But the mechanical NDs are just that. On most of the high-end Sony cameras, there's literally a wheel that engages and sometimes sticks and can be a problem for you. It can be an issue. It can certainly be an issue finding a common place in between. But like Courtney points out, going for auto iris is a mistake.
Next question.
Next question from Samuel Nordvik in Norway. How do anti-aliasing filters on camera sensors work?
Typically, traditional anti-aliasing is a process of oversampling the image. So you're getting more. This gets back into what I was talking about before. You get more pixels, and then you scale it down. And as you scale it down, as it's combining those pixels, it starts to. What aliasing is coming from is high contrast areas where you see a stair stepping, where you just it is a. The problem you get into is that, it just sees a pixel, it's at the resolution of the sensor. What anti-aliasing done is it's going to, if you have these here, it's going to start having the pixels next to it have just a little bit of that, and that happens because it's getting blended together. I think the technical term is mushed together. You're mushing the pixels together, and it, it produces a semi-transparent appearance, or pixels that are next to the high contrast pixels that are lower contrast, and a mix between the background and the foreground, and that creates what we tend to refer to as anti-aliasing. And then the most typical way to do that is, especially if you have a still sensor that's capable of for 8K images or 6K images or whatever, and it goes down to your 4K or whatever, the anti-aliasing is oftentimes being created by grabbing all the pixels on that sensor and then blending them together a little bit to get that edge. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, a lot of this is not necessarily done in the camera. It's done in the chipset, the Digic chipset, or whatever is the camera's microcontroller that is processing that image after it's captured. So it's not a physical filter, but it's one that looks for high contrast between a bright white and a bright dark edge. And because there are discrete locations for each pixel, those are little squares next to each other, and let's say they can't handle, it's going to look stair-steppy since you're going to see every little square block going down a diagonal. What it does is it will create new pixels that are halfway between the bright pixel and the dark pixel that's next to it, and it'll put that block in there that a gray pixel, let's say, it'll put a gray pixel in there, and it diffuses the edge, and it fools your eye into thinking it's a smooth edge as opposed to a stair-steppy edge by that half-dark pixel that's been put adjacent to every transition between a bright pixel and a dark pixel.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Courtney, in the old days, wasn't that the detail control that would interfere with that or help with that? Because all cameras were basically
detail, our image enhancement does the opposite of that, which is it increases the contrast at edges. And so that'll give you a sharper edge, but it'll increase the aliasing problem too.
Yeah, because what you get with sharpening. So when you're adding detail, it's just sharpening, and that sharpening is saying I have a light foreground, and then I have a darker background here, and what it'll do is it does a high pass filter, and so it will. If you do a high pass filter in Photoshop, you can actually reproduce this. This is kind of a fun little. I used to do this in one of my classes. We would take an image and do a high pass. There's hidden in the Photoshop calculations. This isn't because high pass is probably one of the oldest ones ever made. There's a high pass filter. You duplicate your layer, do a high pass filter, and set that to, I believe it's overlay. And you'll see it, the gray, what's pure gray will not do anything to the image, but the image will look sharper. And the reason is that you are making the brighter areas a little brighter and the darker areas a little darker, and that creates along any area of contrast. And that's how sharpening works. That's how your detail works. And it's a relatively simple math operation which allows it to be done in a camera. Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I know I'm a little off subject, but you just brought it up in Photoshop. How did they get the Hollywood hero shots that look a little bit posterized, almost as if they're a print piece as opposed to a photo?
You'd have to
reduce
show me.
the color depth.
What's that, color depth?
Yeah, you reduce the color depth from you go to like 4-bit color depth on each color, and that'll give you the posterization, so that you'll have hard lines of demarcation between one color and the next, one brightness for blue and the next brightness for blue. There's less difference. If you have 256 different levels for blue in an 8-bit, and you have, 4 times that with 10-bit, et cetera, et cetera. So if you go down to 7-bit or 4-bit, you'll have stair-stepping and you'll get posterization.
Next question.
Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, Canada. Some budget micro four thirds cameras have reduced autofocus performance running at 4K versus 1080p. Is this a processor performance limitation or something else related to the sensor?
It's a processor performance. It's got the 4K is taking more processing power, and it may not be able to, especially in a lower cost one, it's just not going to have the chips to look at the entire image and process that. I do think the next generation, if we look at DJI's 4D camera, that's the future, which is that we're going to start seeing LiDAR sensors being added to these cameras. They've become commoditized with the phones and everything else. I think the problem right now is that Apple buys so many of them that no one else can edge their way in. But the LiDAR, I think, is going to be the next generation of figuring out what that focus looks like. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Is 36 by 24 millimeters the largest camera sensor commonly used full frame? And how does 4/3 compare?
There are medium format digital cameras that shoot at 100 megapixels. I don't think that they shoot video. I think it's a lot of data, but these are still cameras. I think Phase One makes them. There's a more traditional company. Fuji, I think, makes them as well. But these are incredibly large. These are medium format. So they're this big. So, and they are very, very high resolution. They're used for product shots, modeling, that type of thing. And it's amazing. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you can get digital backs for Hasselblad cameras, some of the old medium format cameras with a digital back, which have very large sensors.
Hasselblad was what I was trying to, I was having a brain.
Yes. Yeah. Hasselbrain.
Hasselbrain. I had Hasselbrain, yeah, exactly. Which is which is better than having Hasselhoff. Next question.
Jack Ruppel from Breckenridge, Colorado. I've got 2 old Kodak digital cameras. Could I take a filter out and have an infrared stereo camera?
So the only thing you'd have is you might be able to take stills that way. The challenge that you get into is I'm really fascinated by the idea of a stereo infrared camera. Huh. Yeah. Yeah, you could do that. The stills will work. If anything's moving, the real problem is that you're not going to be able to gen lock them. You need to gen lock the 2 cameras so that they're firing the sensors at exactly the same time. Otherwise, if anything's moving, so you could do, landscape shots and stuff like that. But if anything's moving, it'll be in 2 different places on either, and that'll make your eyes cross. So that your eyes will get very confused if it sees just something slightly off there. So you need to gen lock is important between cameras if you really want to have a true 3D camera. I have never thought of an infrared stereo camera, and now I am obsessed in moments. In less than a minute, I'm obsessed with the idea of. All right, more about that later. But you could do that. There's other ways to do that as well. I mean, you can use GoPros. There's a company. There's a company that I just heard somebody yell on the air. so yeah. I guess your mute doesn't mute all the way. So if you yell, then
sorry,
that's okay. Yeah. Anyway, GoPro. There's a company that takes GoPros and removes that filter as well. And the GoPros are a little easier to put next to each other for stereo. We've done that in the past, but I'm so obsessed with that now. That seems like it would be so cool to see the world in not only in infrared but stereo infrared. Hey, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you could just take the Wyze cameras, which they're sensitive to infrared as well as regular light. They don't have the infrared filters in them because they have night mode, which puts them in infrared mode. So you just put 2 of them next to each other to get stereo, Alex.
You gen lock. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine from Panama City, Panama. What is the best source to learn all the ins and outs of camera handling, ISO, f-stops, exposure, etc.?
Mitchell.
I love Caleb over at DSLR Shooter. He has a great way about him. And I was talking to Chris Fritchie yesterday. He has 2 new FX30s, and there's a course for like $100 where he takes you through the whole thing. He breaks it all down. So not only is it specific to camera jargon, but it's specific to that camera.
And who's that again?
Caleb at DSLR Shooters.
Nice. Next question.
Next question coming in from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Is this an option for any of the panelists? A Photon Camera app lets you shoot photos to external drives with an iPhone 15 Pro.
It could be. I guess photos, I've never needed to, I don't know why I would shoot photos to an external drive. Shooting video to an external drive on a new iPhone is great. And I've done that already. I'm not sure why I would shoot, I'm not sure why I would shoot photos that way. So, because they don't take up that much storage. So, sure. I mean, you could do it, but I just don't know why. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, no, because I don't have an iPhone 15. But there are a lot of photographers that have Wi-Fi cards in their cameras for DSLRs because as they're shooting, the pictures that are in the camera are being transmitted to a laptop nearby, and they're being put up on a big screen for all the agency to look at. So look at each still, and they're evaluating them as they're being shot. So it's in a situation like that where you want to have multiple people evaluating what you're shooting, it might be handy.
Next question.
Next one in from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. How do you do camera sensor cleaning? Amazon sells kits that do this.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Be very, very careful because you can really mess things up on your camera by doing that. But generally, a little bit of a puffer, carefully applied, will do the job for you. But yeah, there are kits. You can get them.
Unless you do it regularly, I would highly recommend getting somebody who does this professionally to clean your sensor out. It is a really great way to. They're also insured, so if they scratch your sensor, they'll fix it. But it's kind of a big deal. There's a procedure to do it. You need to first, of course, blow everything off of it with a puffer carefully. You don't want to scratch anything. Then oftentimes they do an anti-static pass to pull things off, and then you're putting a solution on it and kind of squeegeeing across it. And I have done it once to an old camera, and it made me so uncomfortable. I was like, I'm not going to do that again. It worked, but and I know some people do it all the time. If you want to know how dirty your sensor is, what you want to do is take your camera and close it down to f16 or f22, light it up enough, and point it at a white card, a white foam core, and light it up so that the foam core is well exposed, and you'll see how dirty your sensor is. It's probably a lot dirtier than you think. When you're shooting short depth of field, you won't see it. It's only when you start closing it down that you'll suddenly see everything on the sensor. So it is something you have to think about. I do the thing that I do the most is anybody who's worked with me knows that I'm, since I usually own the cameras and the lenses, I'm super sensitive about how long the camera body is left open. People who work in film and people who work in production a lot of times will just set that camera down and they'll just let it sit there while they're figuring something out. The maximum time that it takes me to put a lens on is about 10 seconds. And I sit there and I set the lens down, I loosen the cap, I set the camera down, I loosen the cap, I pull both caps off and I put it together. And I want that time to be, I also don't want the sensor to be sitting up. So I want the camera to be usually mounted somewhere so I can mount it. Setting the camera on its back with the sensor up is a great way to attract more stuff. So those are things that they kind of think about. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, don't let the camera system with hay fever change the lenses for you. The other thing is the Canons have something called image sensor cleaning mode when you go to shut it down and turn it back on again.
Sony's have that too.
I'm not sure how they work, whether they just vibrate the sensor a little bit to shake any dust off.
I actually think that they build up a static charge and release it, and it pops everything off of it.
It's like an ionizer or something that changes the static charge.
I think it's actually laser beams, the freaking laser beams. So.
It's lasers.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Hey, thanks so much to the panelists for both the first hour and the second hour for getting us through that. And thank you to all our producers asking lots of great questions. This was definitely, we had a little change at the very beginning, and so we needed a little more time, and the producers came up right under us and asked a lot of great questions, and we even went over a little bit. And because we went over, we want to thank also the incredible production team who put up with us going a little over. Thank you for making that actually happen, and for making all of these happen. There's the development, there's the planning, there's the production. All of those things are happening, and we really appreciate all of your contribution. We traveled, wait for it, we traveled 92,000 miles. It's 149,000 kilometers answering all these questions in the Tlaloc Traversal, and that is 735 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
Really sorry about that shout coming through. It's at full mute, not minus 40. It's at full mute. So I got to call Gordon about that.
No, a lot of times those mutes don't go all the way. They go to like negative 60. So if you yell loud enough, you'll still hear it at negative 30 or negative 40 because it's a negative 60.
Apparently, yelling "I'm on the air" to somebody ringing my doorbell exceeds that.
Not a mute.
You need a zing.
It's just an attenuator.
It's a ring with a taser.
It literally shocked me when you said, I heard that. I went, what?
Yeah, both of us were like, where did that come from? Yeah, like I could see Courtney looking around going, what? So, yeah.
It's going,
yeah, like, what happened to that?
Now I know.
Yep. See ya.
Adios.